So some great resources to build into your programs and classes. As we got started, maybe you could hear the song Brave by Sarah Bareilles, kind of setting the tone to remind us it's not always easy for students to speak up and voice an opinion and stand up and make choices, but it has valuable consequences when they do. And I want to be able to help you support them while integrating new and exciting material into what you do. So keep sharing those ages and places. I see kind of all over. Still, I'm going to read a few, like California. We got Kansas. So really from all over today. And Heights High in Cleveland Heights. That's great. So welcome, everyone. Feel free to keep dropping in the chat, both the answers to those and then any questions or comments that you want. So I'm going to have Mary put the agenda up and show you our speakers today. If we can go to that slide. Either way. First up, we're going to hear from Jim Reddy. Jim graduated from The Ohio State University with degrees in Natural Resource Management and Secondary Life Science Education. He has been a teacher for 36 years and is currently teaching AP Environmental Science, Ecology, Biology, and a class on sustainable agriculture for the Granville Exempted Village School District. In 2016, he was named the North American Association of Environmental Education Teacher of the Year. And in 2017, he was awarded the Arthur S. Holden Teacher Award for Excellence in Science Education. Along with teaching, he manages the school's organic garden, greenhouse, and 100-acre land lab created by his students. His passion for teaching is founded in a belief that his students are our future and that when empowered, they can do amazing things. He lives in Granville, Ohio with his wife and 4 kids, and his hobbies are all outdoors. After Jim, we will hear from Adam Voight. Adam is an associate professor in the School of Education and Counseling at Cleveland State University and director of the Center for Urban Education. His work focuses on youth participatory action research, SchYIPAR, student voice, and how young people can use research and data to influence decisions in schools and communities. He leads several regional initiatives that support students in designing and carrying out their own research projects on issues they care about, working closely with educators to integrate student voice into existing programs and structures. Adam's work sits at the intersection of research, practice, and leadership development with a strong emphasis on practical tools that educators can adapt to their own settings. And after Adam, Marsha Jones will share with us. Marsha is a lifelong educator and passionate about promoting and developing the agency of students and teachers. Over the past 45 years, she has served as a classroom teacher, a district level director of special education, associate superintendent, and adjunct professor at the University of Arkansas. Currently, Marsha is enjoying freelance writing, promoting agency for students and educators. And finally, I will share some details about a project that University School implements with their 6th graders in collaboration with YEI and our Pitch Toolkit, which may offer additional ideas for incorporating new elements into your program. Just a quick reminder that we are recording this session, and the recording slides and links from the Power Hour will be sent to you after the program. And again, feel free to ask questions or put comments in the chat. We will have just a minute in between each speaker, and I can address those. And then at the end, if there are more questions, we can do that. So, Jim, with no further ado, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I do have some slides I'm going to try to bring up here real quick. If I can, did that wrong. If I can share these, and go here. And don't be scared. I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to race through them. So hopefully this will be much easier. Where is it? I think it's, nope. Hold on. I got to move this down maybe. There we go. Okay. So I want to start real quickly with just a kind of a background history in terms of how I got to where I am. So my original plan was, as you saw from what I graduated with from Ohio State, was to go into biology, field biology. So I was a tree hugger, bunny kisser, And that was where I was going to go with my career. I remember very vividly having a conversation with my dad when I told him I was going to go off to Canada and study wolves. And his comment there was, why do you want to do that? What's your why? And I said, well, these are the things I love. These are the things I want to protect. And he said, how are you going to do that from the far reaches of Canada? So he passed away shortly after that. And I remember thinking about that a little bit and realizing that if I wanted to save those sort of things, the best way to do that was to get other people to feel the way I did. So I transitioned big time coming out of college and went into education. And I decided that what I wanted to do was actually reach out to the younger generation, the next generation, because I thought they had the most opportunity to actually help with the problems that we were dealing with. Problem there was they were disconnected from the natural world in a very unique way, right? I mean, their understanding of the outdoors was box set of planet Earth. So from there, when I got into the classroom, I decided one of the first things I have to do is be able to reconnect this generation to the natural world, because if they care about it, then, they'll take care of it. In doing that, I started teaching AP Environmental Science. And, it was a class that I really, really wanted to teach. I had the kids I really wanted to teach. They were motivated. They were smart. They were go-getters. And as I went into this educational process, everything was fine, except for the fact that as the year went on, the kids became more and more and more overwhelmed. They knew the content, they were engaged, but at the same time, they just didn't know what to do with the information. And so I remember vividly having a conversation, talking about sustainable agriculture. We were wrapping up the year, the unit, and I was talking about all the different ways that we can grow food to feed the world in a way that was beneficial to both, food production and wildlife. And a young lady raised her hand and said, if this is such a good idea, why aren't we doing this? And it was right at the end of the day. It was a Friday. The bell rang. I said, hey, we'll talk about that Monday. They come back in Monday, and I had this grand idea of creating a couple raised beds, throwing them in the courtyard, planting some carrots, harvesting some lettuce, and the kids would have an experience with it. And as I'm explaining this to them, they're all looking around the room like that's the lamest idea they've ever heard in their life. And so I called them on. I said, hey, you said you wanted to do something. Why are you backing away from that now? And they said, no, we wanted to do what you were talking about. We wanted to do sustainable agriculture, not a raised bed with carrots. So what followed was probably the best 2 days of my teaching career. I just said, okay, you guys tell me what you want to do. And they filled the whiteboards, every space in our room with their ideas, their concepts, their understanding of what we had discussed in terms of sustainable agriculture. At the end of all of that, I said, this is amazing. I'm overwhelmed. I'm blown away. I'm inspired by your work. In fact, I'm not even going to make you take the test. You're all going to get an A. You obviously understand sustainable agriculture, and now we got to move on. And they raised their hand and they said, well, whoa, we're going to do that, right? And I said, no, we were going to do a raised bed with carrots because that's what we can afford. And they said, well, how would we do what we want to do? And I said, well, we'd have to get money. 12 kids volunteered on the spot to raise money to write a grant to start doing this. They wrote the grant. It got denied. They went back and fixed the problems. Long story short, I wanted this. They created this. I had very, very little to do with it. This is just them literally stepping up and saying, we have an idea. I got out of their way and they ran with it. Now, this has been a work in progress. This wasn't created in the first day. But what's happened is students have taken this idea, have taken this passion, taken this drive, and passed the torch to the next generation, to the next class, to the next class, to the next class. And we've slowly added on to this idea. And not only did we build the garden, but then they started to use the garden because it was theirs. So they found ways in which they could engage with it. They found ways in which they could connect it back to the community and use the garden to actually support what they believed in coming out of the classroom. So as I flip through these pictures very quickly, you'll see that, not only did we just grow food, but we literally took the food up into the school cafeteria. They harvest in the morning and they're feeding their fellow classmates in the afternoon. So it's an idea that wasn't just in theory, but actually in practice, they're producing food and feeding people. And then they reached out to the community and they made, the garden actually a community location where people would come. One of my favorite memories is a kid riding down on his bike, jumping off the bike, running into the garden where we had our farmer's market and pulling out a little grocery sheet from his mom saying, hey, go pick these things up at the garden. So these were my kids growing this food, selling this food, and providing it for the community as the community grew. And then we said, okay, if we're growing food, we're limited in terms of when we can. So how do we build on that? So they just started adding pieces to the garden. And every time there was a problem that came up, it was their problem, and therefore it was their solution. And they were the ones that were saying, we want to do this, we can't do this, how do we do this? How do we make this happen? And so we went through all sorts of different stages and developments as the garden moved forward throughout the process. They wanted chickens. We got a garden on the original dream, of way back when. They said, we got to have chickens. So then they said, well, we're going to bring in some chickens. We're going to put them in the garden. Turned out that the village didn't allow chickens. And so they said, no, you can't do that. And they went to the superintendent and said, well, we're going to go down and argue in front of the village council to see if we can get special permission to do this. And he said, hey, the school is up for levy right now. I'd prefer you not do that. So he kind of backed them down off of that idea. But in their research, they realized that where they were going to put the chickens right here is in the village, but where most of the garden is actually in the township. So they were able to go out and get chickens and bring them into the garden. So they were able to solve that problem as they moved forward. As a result of that, my kids, as they expanded on these ideas, put themselves out in front of the community, out in front of other people more and more and more and more. One of the adages we have in our class is that your voice is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So these kids are learning to be advocates for their own ideas, advocates for their own future, and they're not afraid to go out and argue or to discuss when they need to do that. As this was all going on, and I was kind of blown away by it. This was nothing I planned, nothing that I organized. This is nothing that I did. And so, I was just sitting back in awe of these students trying to figure out, how is this happening? How is this even working? And one of my mentors at the time was a teacher that I'd met at a work conference out west. And I remember this is a picture he turned in for his what do they call it? The little shot you're supposed to put in that, your face shot where this is who you're meeting. And we were supposed to do a real formal one. And this is the one that he sent in that ended up in the book. And I remember looking at the book saying, okay, this is the guy I got to have lunch with. But what he did is he walked into a school. He realized that what I'm doing as a classroom teacher isn't working. And he just walked away. And he went out and built his own school. From kindergarten to 12, he designed it so that students were doing what they wanted to do in the classroom. And he talked about this idea of Moodle, which came out of a book that he later sent to me that was actually about the next industrial revolution. And he said, oh, this is a great book about education. You got to read this one. And what it really talked about is how, if we're wasting these kids' times, if you ever find yourself sitting in front of the classroom saying, well, this is important because, we shouldn't have to convince students what they're learning is important. They should look at it and say, hey, I can use this information because it's going to help me accomplish what I want to accomplish. And so I started trying to incorporate that more and more into my education. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is actually a quote that came out of an op-ed article in our local paper talking about the next big project that the students did. And I love this quote. I love this little excerpt out of the thing because it really talks about why students are doing what they want to do and going way beyond whatever would happen just in the classroom in terms of, I'm going to get an A on this paper. I'm going to turn it in and, I'll be happy because it's on the refrigerator at home in front of my parents. The tricky part of all of this was recreating it. And again, it was kind of organic. It happened by accident. So over the last 15 years now, what I've been trying to do is put together some sort of framework where I can repeat this over and over and over again. So when you look at this right here, this is a contract. At the beginning of this process, the kids fill out the contract. They say, here's what we're going to do. These are our objectives. And they break it down into very manageable to-do steps. We're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. I look at the contract. I go through and say, is there anything that you need to add on to this? I like this. Can you add on this? Can you change that? We all agree to it. We both sign off on it. And this is what they use as their rubric to move forward in terms of any project that they might be working on. We also incorporate things like SWOT analysis and that sort of stuff. So we're getting constant, almost weekly feedback on the process as they move through these different projects that they're all working on. And then through that, we were able to start to replicate some of what we did in that first garden. So I'll show you one more real quickly. This is the land lab that we installed. It's 100 acres. Started out as 43, and then we added a few more. Now we're just shy of 100 acres. But this was just students wanted to build a wetland. They wanted to build an area where they could actually go and study nature on their own space. And they didn't have to, worry about, can I walk here? Can I touch this? Can I move that? And so they actually went out, if I go back here, with a gentleman, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, to have their original plan kind of looked at by a mentor, looked at by somebody who knew what they were doing, an expert, and approve on it. And when he came back with the kids, he said, yeah, this is a great idea, but let's go bigger, right? I'm going to fund this whole thing. And so going from your 5 acre, we'll bump it up to 43 acres. So this is the kids going back to the drawing board, replanning now that they have more opportunity, more stake in the game. And I love this picture because as you look at it, that's unbelievable focus. I mean, those kids are absolutely 100% wrapped up in what they're doing. The bell rings and they don't even get up and move. They're still, hey, I need 5 more minutes to wrap this up. The project was a great success. So we went from a farm field to this is what you see today. You can see not only is it in the front of the building, but it's also about another 30 some acres behind the building. And we put in 4 wetlands. We have a bunch of prairies. We have vernal pools. We restored a stream, all by the work, the design, the plan of the students as they move forward over the last 10 years. Some of the pictures from that space out there, some of the cool things that we were able to identify. They actually are getting published papers out of this. So there's been research now that they can do on their own site. And with the help of Denison University up the hill, we've been able to get some of those papers published. They wanted to add bees to our agroforestry area. So when they talked to the principal and the superintendent, they said, we're a little worried about bees because of, students getting stung. We might have somebody who's allergic to it. So they actually sat down with the entire 4th and 5th grade at our schools and talked to them about bees, safety around bees, the importance of bees, and brought them on board to the point where a swarm showed up at the actual playgrounds, and the teachers were going to call out somebody to exterminate the bees. The kids stood around the bees, wouldn't let anybody get there, and then they called us, and we came and captured the swarm and put it back into the box at one of our areas at the land lab. They've done signage, working with different classes to make it so that you can go out in the land lab and learn while you're there. And then we have the problem of once you start giving them ideas, then they've all got ideas. So now what we're dealing with is the fact that rather than one big project, I'll sit in a class and I'll have 12, 15 different things that the students want to go after. So this is our working project board. And you can see they've got different things that they're touching on. We'll meet together once a week, go over the board. How is this working? How is this working? Kind of organize the progress moving forward. And the best part about this is, even though it's not your project, you can still weigh in. You can still provide support to what other students are doing and provide ideas, bounce, different thoughts off of them and get everybody moving forward. To make this happen, we've been using Basecamp, which is a great tool to organize this work, not only within their groups, but also outside their groups if they want to incorporate experts into that process. So we put this to work, and this is also something that they can be using outside of the school day. So when we're doing this, all of a sudden what we'll see is we'll have I'll be on Basecamp and I'll get a link that I've got a student at 12 o'clock at night and he's working on some project. He just uploaded some information to the students that are there. All right, and then moving forward, just a couple last things. When you're looking at the idea of the classroom, we're always telling kids to get outside the box. We never let them leave the box. So this is kind of a cool example where I had a student who was a journalist student. That's what he wanted to do, but he was in my environmental science class, and he said, hey, I want to write. He goes, but I think what I can do is, write a newspaper or a magazine, ongoing magazine about the land lab. And he said, but I want to work with the intermediate schools because that's where the land lab is. And so he actually worked with his English teacher to free up time in his day so he could go over and work with these students and be their guiding force on a magazine that they ended up being the editors on. So you can see here's the editor. She at the time was in 5th grade. And all the people who have written on here are all both back in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And then they incorporated artwork from the kindergartners. They incorporated articles from the high school, and they put it all together in a magazine that ended up turning out really well. And then just some more projects that we've done relating to these sort of things. Give kids free reign, and they'll do all sorts of really, really cool things to make this happen. And they'll, be a voice in the community. They'll get out, they'll start talking, they'll start sharing. And all of a sudden, they're the ones on the stage. They're not the ones listening. They're not the ones that are sitting back and taking notes. They're the ones that we're listening to and taking notes from them, learning from them, and progressing from them. So, I'm a real big believer in the fact that, the idea of leaders for tomorrow is not right, right? I mean, they should be and need to be leaders today. They need to be at the table. They need to be sitting there. It's their future we're talking about. They should have a voice in all that conversation. So my students have become very, very adamant about that. If we're talking about things that are affecting their life, they want to be involved in that process. They want to have something to say about that. One last thing I'll share. This is we talk about assessment. How do we tell if the kids are getting the information? This is an assessment tool that I use. At the beginning, you can see in the green, this is where the students started out before we started in on a unit. And that's meaning at the bottom on the x-axis, I don't have a lot of information on this topic. And on the y-axis, I don't really know that I have an impact on this topic, that I can change anything. So through the course of the year, the idea is that they go from here to here. And what this means is I now have a better understanding of what's going on. But more important to me, I now feel like I have control over this situation. I don't feel overwhelmed. I feel like I can make a difference, that I can make a change. And so I want all my kids to be right here. And if we don't get there, then we circle back around and we say, okay, what do we need to get you there? What do we need to move the arrow so that you're up in this upper part of the grid where you think you understand what's going on and you think you have the ability to make a change by yourself? And then lastly, just to kind of wrap that up, these are some of my quick takeaways. It's not, as a teacher, we don't want to have all the answers. We always feel like we're the ones that should be able to answer any question. I've gotten away from that very quickly because kids are asking questions I don't have answers to. I know that if I'm going to give them control, I honestly have to give them control. I have to get out of their way. And usually I'm the biggest obstacle. I'm like, oh, we can't do that. And then they turn around and they do it. But if I'm going to get out of their way, I also have to let them fail. It's okay to fail. It's all okay to learn something from that. That's good. I tell my kids to dream big. We'll start small, but we got to dream big. If you're not excited in the first day, it's not going to happen. Networking is hugely important. And lastly, money is not important. If it's a good idea, we'll figure out a way to pay for it. We just installed a anaerobic digester in our school to take all our trash, all our food waste, and put it back into our soil so we can grow more plants. It's an amazing machine, but it cost the kids over $50,000. That's a pretty big school project that they were able to do themselves. They sat at the meeting. They talked with the owner of the company. They, bartered him down a little bit. They made some promises. They went to the school board, said, here's how we're going to do this. And sure enough, after 2.5 years, 3 classes, they were able to get that aerobic digester in our school. So that's where I'm going to end it. And if you want to follow along with what we're doing, we're at Granville School Sustainability Project, planning for the future. And I'm pretty excited about the future. I'll tell you that. Thank you.
Jim, that was amazing. I know I was supposed to cut Jim off if he went overtime, and I just couldn't do it because it was so exciting and interesting and just so many ideas. And I love how you explain the whole progression from this little tiny seed into everything that it's grown into. And I hope that that was as inspiring to everybody else as it was to me to just see how letting that happen authentically and with the support. And I know that you said that you didn't do anything, but you let that happen and you let that evolve. And so I think that's the key, right? So, I am going to pass it on, for the sake of time, but, I'm sure that there will be questions and everything at the end. So thank you so much. That was great. I'm going to pass it over to Adam. You would like to share now?
It's, I echo your sentiments, Ms. Clymer. That was really inspirational. Jim, I want to follow up with you and talk more. I've got a bunch of questions. Great example of student voice, which is where I wanted to start. So I've been in academia for a long time. So excuse me if I start with a theoretical framework here, but that tends to be the currency where I work. So thanks again for inviting me. And it's fun to be part of this space here where people are thinking seriously about student initiative, entrepreneurship. So when I think about student voice, I think it can mean a lot of different things. And I find this continuum that I'm sharing on my screen here to be a helpful way to organize that thinking. So on the left here, we have students as respondents. And this is where many schools begin with, student surveys, feedback forms, exit tickets, et cetera. Students are here answering questions that adults create. And then moving to the right, we have students as advisors, and this might look like a youth advisory board, a student council, where they're giving input on a decision, or students are kind of giving structured feedback on a program. Further to the right, we have students as co-designers, where they're involved earlier in the process, and they might be helping to design a course or shape a program or co-create some sort of solution with adults. So, for example, students might help redesign a school's grading policy alongside administrators, or co-develop an elective course or something like that. So, and then finally on the far right, we have students as researchers and actors, and this is where students identify the problem, generate evidence related to that problem, develop recommendations, and directly engage with decision makers. And it's in this rightmost space where most of my work lives. So I think, all of these stages are valid. The question isn't, whether one is good or bad, but rather how far along the continuum we might be able to push. So the model that I use most often, as Ms. Clymer said in my introduction, is called Youth Participatory Action Research, or SchYIPAR. And in practical terms, it works like this. So following along the cycle here, it's step one, students identify a real issue that affects them. So this could be something related to school climate, mental health supports, grading policies. We have students this year working on an AI in education project, discipline practices. And then in step two, they design a way to study that problem, to generate original data using surveys that they create, interview protocols that they design, focus groups, sometimes the analysis of existing data. Then they analyze their data that they collect to derive new evidence, to figure out what is to be learned from their research endeavor. And from that, they develop recommendations that are based in the evidence that they create. And the SchYIPAR cycle culminates with students presenting their recommendations and their evidence directly to adult decision makers who have decision-making power over the issue that they're concerned with. So that might be their principal, superintendent, school board, whoever is in whoever has decision-making authority. So the key difference in this model is that students aren't just reacting to adult questions. They're really the ones who are setting the agenda, naming the issues, et cetera. So I want to talk briefly about two spaces where I've been implementing this SchYIPAR model, two different spaces. One is through a federally grant-funded initiative called SchYIPAR, School-Based Youth Participatory Action Research. We came up with that acronym, lots of acronyms in this space. And SchYIPAR is all about working with classroom teachers to figure out ways to embed this basic process in their teaching. So we've been very experimental in our approach to this. We've been working with math teachers, ELA teachers, social studies teachers, librarians, school counselors, anybody who's interested in expanding opportunities for student voice in their school space. We've worked with them to figure out how it might look to lead students through these 4 steps of the SchYIPAR cycle in that space. So, for example, we've had a math teacher who, in an algebra class, has allowed students to create their own survey, their own data collection instrument, and collect their own data, and then use their data related to an issue that they care about in their school to illustrate all of the algebra concepts that they're responsible for teaching in lieu of using, the textbook website data. And, the argument there is that makes learning much more relevant and engaging for them if they're working on something that they care about using data that they've collected themselves. So we're working on this SchYIPAR initiative through a really innovative team of teachers across the state, including one in your district, Jim. I'll have to connect with you later. I think she moved on, actually, Kim Gary. But so that's been really exciting to figure out ways to embed this approach to student voice in classrooms. And then the other space that we've been doing this SchYIPAR work in is through a couple of really big regional programs, one up here in the Cleveland area and one in the Columbus, Ohio area, called the First String Student Leadership Institute and the Student Leadership Research Collaborative, respectively, where teams of students, about 5 students from high schools in multiple districts, come together at some common location once per month and go through a facilitated process with my team at Cleveland State, some folks at Ohio State, to, again, choose an issue that they care about and then conduct original research projects over the course of the year to learn more about that issue and then present their evidence and recommendations to their district superintendents or their principals at an end-of-year conference that we help to organize. So that's the gist of SchYIPAR. And what we've learned over almost a decade of doing this work in the spaces that I just described is that when schools move from this students as respondents form of student voice to students as researchers and actors form of student voice, a few things shift. So first, students become much more serious because, you know, I think Jim's example is a great illustration of this. When they know that the work that they're doing, when they know that their research findings will go to real decision makers, the quality of the work changes. Second, adults begin to see students differently. I can't tell you how many times I've heard adult decision makers, administrators be audience to students' SchYIPAR presentations and just, you know, gush about how shocked they were that students could produce this kind of work and that they could do this kind of thinking. But in this case, students aren't just offering their opinions, they're presenting real research evidence, empirical evidence that they've produced themselves to back up the things that they're suggesting be done differently in the school. And then third, schools often start solving better problems because the issues that students prioritize, that they focus on in their SchYIPAR, aren't always the ones that adults would have chosen. So, for example, one project that's very simple and very small in terms of the scope of the problem that I love to talk about that a group down in the Columbus, Ohio area chose to pursue a few years ago, the issue was big. It was mental health. But what they learned through their research is that one of the biggest issues with mental health in their school is that students weren't taking advantage of some of the mental health resources that the school provided, specifically school counselors. And a big reason for that surfaced through interviews that they did with their peers and surveys that they administered is that there was a big window that students could see as they were walking through one of the common areas in the school that gave way to the waiting area outside the counselor's office. And students felt stigmatized if they were sitting there waiting to see the counselor and their peers could kind of, you know, they were in a fishbowl for their peers to view. So they learned that through their research, and their solution was simply to paper over that window. And that ended up resulting in, you know, a lot more traffic to the school counselor and, you know, one would hope better mental health outcomes for students in that school. But it's a great example of a problem that a lot of adults in the school were oblivious to that came to the surface again because students bothered to do this research on it. So I'm going to finish just by trying to connect some dots between this SchYIPAR model and entrepreneurship education, since I know that's what this group is interested in. So, you know, you guys already know that entrepreneurship education is all about initiative, creativity, innovation. So I'm going to kind of make the case that there might be an opportunity to layer in 2 additional elements that derive from the SchYIPAR model that I've been working with, and that's evidence and authentic influence. So a couple of potential practical shifts that might move entrepreneurship programs further right on that student voice continuum that I started with. First, you might consider moving from idea generation to problem investigation, so to research. So before students design solutions, you could have them collect real data from the people affected, teach them how to conduct short surveys, do interviews, focus groups, simple data analysis. And as I explained, I've found in our work that alone can kind of move them from expression to something closer to co-design or to research. And then second, expanding co-design opportunities. So if a student's building a product or an initiative, you could involve real stakeholders early on in the process. So instead of students pitching fully formed ideas, you could have them co-develop concepts with intended users, peers, teachers, community members. And then third, create authentic decision points. So identifying a real audience where student recommendations matter, a school leader, community partner, local organization, even one authentic decision-making space we found really shifts the dynamic and tells students that this isn't just an exercise, it stands to make real-world difference, change. So I'll stop there. We have this website resource called SchYIPAR.org related to the classroom-based implementation project that I described that I would encourage you guys to take a look at if you want to learn more. There's lots of information about what SchYIPAR is, and we have a lot of very specific resources, including lesson plans that are available for free. Like I said, this is federally funded, so we're obligated to make all of our resources free, which we're happy to do. But I'd be pleased to talk to anybody more who's interested to learn more about our work. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. This is great. It's great to hear how this is being used and out there to support educators and schools all over, and to give this resource as for further support as people want to implement this more. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm going to pass it over to Marsha now.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be with like-minded folks. Jim and Adam, you inspire me, and I'm so thrilled to learn of your projects. I'm going to share just a few little slides as well. My colleagues and I, Derek Winmuth from New Zealand and George Edwards, who is a part of the New England Association for Accreditation of Schools and Colleges, and then a friend of mine, Annette Thompson, who's a retired principal, we're so desirous to see projects like Young Entrepreneurs take hold in their classrooms and with their students to make all those great things happening the way Jim made his work happening. And yet we were finding that that wasn't as easy for some educators to let go, the way Jim said, I just have to get out of the way. And as Adam described, having that continuum of voice, we observed that there was a lot of artificialness to how kids were actually being engaged, and in reality, the teacher was doing the work and trying to give credit to the students, whether or not the work was authentically theirs or not. So we worked for about 3 years to design an intentional model where agency is promoted and developed, and we make sure that we realize that agency is something that teachers must be able to have. Jim, you must have a tremendous environment where you are that allows teachers to have the agency to do the work they want to do. Sometimes that's not as available as what it sounds like with you. And we know that it has to be intentionally brought forward to give permission so that the kids themselves can take control in their environment. The framework that we developed is, don't get overwhelmed by this. It's 14 elements, 7 of which are the conditions created by teachers to allow agency to flourish, to open the gate, so to speak, so that the agency that you want to see out of your students can occur, and you'd have a confidence to understand how to make that happen. On the other hand, we wanted to make sure that we had at least a common language on what were the characteristics that we wanted to see in students that would emerge as a result of what these conditions that we were trying to create might have with the students as an outcome. We use language that is very common: your motivation and engagement, support and supervision, measuring success, learning environment, curriculum, acts of teaching, design of learning. So it isn't the labels that define what we're trying to do. It's what happens behind the labels that allow you to move towards a more agentic learning environment. Same thing true with the characteristics that we're wanting to observe in our students. Again, the labels are not unusual. Collaboration, digital literacy, assessment for learning, learners as leaders, competencies for life, learner-driven learning, assessment capability. But it's how those behaviors look once a student has moved to true, authentic, agentic behavior is what we tried to define and describe with our faculty in this book. Now, I will tell you that this is about a 200-page book. It is totally free. It is filled with lots and lots of resources. I did not take all the pictures that I could have brought forward, but as an example, one of the things is that for each of the conditions created by teachers and for each of the characteristics of learning, we have designed a rubric that lets you kind of analyze where am I in terms of actually authentically getting my students into a shifted paradigm, into a cultural shift that really matters based on that characteristic. The other thing that we have is a tool that would allow you to say, what is the area of either a condition in my classroom or the characteristic I want my student that I am most interested in, so that you would select that element to start with, and then you would build out from there, because obviously these things interface and interact with each other. So you're not expected to start at page 1 and read through to the end. There are ways in which you can interface with the book in small bites and kind of eat the elephant in small bites, because as you impact one area of the continuum, you're going to be impacting the other areas of the characteristics and or conditions of your classroom. So we want that learner profile that schools are putting together to really have the meat of what we want from our students to actually be real. And that's why we wanted to make sure that this book was free to others. We do have an in-service model that is available, that is also online, so that if you wanted to, and a leader in your building wanted to use this as a tool for professional development so that your teachers could have more confidence in how to release that energy it takes to get agency started in your building as a culture, then that is available to you as well. The last thing I was going to share then is we have done several blog posts and articles initially with the Aurora Institute, and now that's been shifted to Full Scale Learning. Some of you may have been at that conference as well. And we wrote an article that supports what Adam's work is on what voice and choice can actually look like. And we found out that sometimes in our classrooms, teachers believe they are giving students voice and choice, but in reality, it's so teacher-directed, or it's limited or imposed in choices. And so we just simply use this little analogy of how you have a family vacation, and sometimes, you know, the mom or the dad make the choices and the kids really have no choices. Or if you went on a river cruise in Europe, you might have some imposed choices. You can go here or you can go there. You might sail in the Virgin Islands and say, we're going to decide what we want to do, but the group as a whole decides together. Or then if you wanted to really have full choice and voice, you might simply say, we're going to drive around Scotland and see what's up, and we're not going to make a plan. We're just going to take the day as it comes and have complete open-ended agenda as to what the outcomes may be. So we're trying to up our game with making sure that we present as much as we can in our written material. And again, if you are interested in any of this, you can go to the website as listed here, and it'll give you access to the full book as known by Agency by Design and Educators Playbook, or you can look at the other supporting materials that are there. If anyone is really interested in having some supporting in-service for their faculty, you can certainly let me know, and I can help you get in touch with some of our other authors as well. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for letting me share this book, and thank you for introducing me to both Jim and Adam, who are like-minded, and I appreciate them so much.
Oh, this is terrific. Thank you so much for sharing and for giving this amazing resource. And I agree with Adam there. I love that continuum. It really helps give vision to what you're trying to do and where we're trying to go. So that is great. And um, I I'm gonna pin myself now. So first of all, amazing, people and connections and resources and support there. My little spiel, I'm gonna make it really short. I am happy to talk with you more about what I'm gonna share about. Um, and I am actually really happy that everybody talked and shared what they did, even if it means I get a little time here because mine can be expanded according to your interests and whatever you want to talk to me about, whatever program this might make you think about, or element of what you're doing already that this might make you think about. So I was going to share, and I'm not even going to maybe I should do, no, I want to do my slides. I'm just going to share a little overview. What I was going to talk about is a sixth grade program that University School does with their students. It's in connection with their innovation and invention project, which is a project that bridges the past and the present, asking students to step into the role of inventor. So rather than just studying historical change makers, they talk about Henry Ford, but they go to Detroit for an overnight. And so they connected it with Henry Ford and they go to the Museum of American Innovation. But instead of just studying it in a historical context, the students identify modern problems and design original solutions and advocate for their ideas through research, prototyping, and then a formal pitch process. And that's where YEI can come in. So if you're not sure where to start, this might be a good place. Hopefully a lot of what Jim talked about makes you think like, oh, this is a little seed, or what Adam talked about with the resource that they're there to help support, or if Marsha's book and looking through and helping guide you. But if you want some guided help too, we work with this project that I'm mentioning from the standpoint of once they have their innovation or invention, how to work through that. And then, of course, with our pitch toolkit, how to share that with their peers and with adults. So I'm not going to go into all the details of what that is, although it's a really cool project. And I will put the slides in the follow-up materials if you want to just look over the overview of the project itself, as well as slides that the sixth grade teachers use with the students, just to give you some ideas. So I just want to throw out there though that anything that you are doing right now, if you want to help enrich that and bring that to a bigger connection to this idea of student voice and advocacy and really open that up to the kids. But you feel like, well, I still have to do the things that I'm doing. We can help you. And I think all of the people that have talked today are happy to help work with you and guide you through some of those steps. So, please reach out and make sure that you, I know it's intimidating sometimes, but make sure that that's not your limiting factor and that you can really get support and guidance and help in the baby step ways. And eventually, like Jim talked about, like snowball this into something really big. So I'm going to pause there just, so that we have time for a couple announcements, before we sign off here. So first of all, thank you again to all the speakers. It was amazing and wonderful. I'm going to let you know that our next Power Hour is scheduled for March 18th. So mark your calendar for that. It's a Wednesday. So Wednesday, March 18th. So save that date. And then, everyone here today can receive 200 YIPI points. If you don't know what YIPI is, stay on after. We can explain the SchYIPAR platform, what the points are, but you will get 200 points for attending this power hour, and I'll put the code in the chat in just a moment. It's a great online platform, and we can give you lots of information about the resources and materials that you can get there if you are not registered already. And then also, I'm going to put in the chat a link to a survey so that you can give some feedback here. We're always curious about how you feel about the content of the power hours. So positive, negative comments, all are welcome. And so I'm going to put the code for SchYIPAR and the link to the survey in, and I'm going to pass it over while I'm doing that. I'm going to pass it over to Ilene, who was going to talk about the pitch challenge and Mott Million, our Ohio pitch challenge as well as the Mott Million pitch challenge. So Ilene, did you want to
I'm here.
talk about that?
Hi, everybody. It is great to learn about all these wonderful programs. Thank you to our speakers today. Thank you to Elizabeth, who facilitates and puts all the wonderful content together. This was another enlightening session. I wanted to just send some reminders for those of you that know about the Mott Million competition. That's the pitch challenge, nationwide pitch challenge. The deadline has just been extended. It's breaking news. The deadline is extended until Sunday, March 8th at midnight. So if you have some entries in the works, you will be hearing about that. If you're working with students to finish entries, know that you have an extended deadline. For those of you who are finishing up entries for the Ohio Pitch Challenge, our deadline is March 2nd. That is, I believe, on Monday. And we are so excited to see the entries from your students and start hearing about the wonderful ideas. For those of you locally, we are hosting the Teen Accelerate Pitch Challenge. That is happening Thursday night at the Cleveland Convention Center. So 10 of our best and brightest high school social entrepreneurship ideas, sort of extending the youth voice theme to a little bit farther into entrepreneurship with ideas that really make a positive improvement in the region. Those are my announcements. Thanks, everybody. We'll put links in the chat for all the competitions.
Awesome. Thank you. And feel free to stick around if you have questions. I know there was one there for Jim. If you have suggestions on powerful ways to pose questions to students to get them thinking about ways that they want to make an impact. And any other questions, please feel free to stick around. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Jim, do you have any suggestions on powerful ways to pose questions?
Yeah, I can address that. And again, a lot of this, unfortunately for me, happens organically. I wish I was a little more intentional on some of this stuff. So these programs that you're putting out there, I think, are great ways to kind of build that capacity within the classroom. But one of the things that I've done is I find that the less I inform the kids up front about a topic, like for example, one of the big take action projects we did was we had a Superfund site in Granville, right adjacent to our water supply where the village got its water from, and nobody really knew about it. It was just there. And so I could have gone into a whole unit on Superfund and all that kind of stuff and talked about, water pollution and so on. And all I did is walk in and I just wrote Granville solvents on the board. And I just said, hey, guys, I just learned about this last night. You might want to check into it. And so they spent the period, and the idea was they would find information, they'd come up, they'd put it on the whiteboard, they'd find more, and they just built this networking of concepts relating to the Granville solvents, which ended up being a Superfund site right in Granville. From that, without me doing anything, they said, what are we going to do about this? So that was kind of the end of that class. And so they were the ones that felt like they had discovered the problem. And I know Adam was talking about this too. They found something in their community that needed to be addressed. But it wasn't me coming to them and saying, I just gave them a topic. I just gave them here's a little nugget of something, and then if they got excited about it, they got excited about it. And so they went from there. And it ended up where they, and that was one that my daughter actually was involved in, but they ended up getting the Ohio and then eventually the federal EPA back on site because they were no longer monitoring it. And they hadn't been following the protocol that they should have been following for the last 10 years. So they actually, I got a cease and desist order from, the federal EPA saying, hey, get these kids off our backs. And I told them I can't. And a week later they were out remonitoring the site. So, I mean, it just snowballed from this little just, hey, what do you think about this idea? And then they ran with it. And if they didn't run with it, they didn't run with it. It wasn't something that, I spent 3 weeks planning out the lesson plans, all that sort of stuff. This is what we're going to do. I just threw it up there and said, what do you guys want to do about this? And they went and they ran with it. So I've been doing more and more of that where we introduce a topic like genetically modified foods. I teach AP environmental science. I don't get into a long discussion on genetically modified foods. I tell the kids, you guys do the research, form 2 teams, and we're going to debate it. And so then they end up, they did a community debate where they got up on the stage, down at our auditorium and they debated back and forth about the merits of genetically modified foods. And that way it also removes my bias from it because, I do have some bias. So that way it's not me saying this is what you should think about genetically modified foods. It's what do you think about it and can you argue your side of it? And so it's a really cool event when that works out. I don't know if that helped or not.
She said it was very helpful. So thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you again so much for being here, Marsha, Jim, and Adam. That was great content and really appreciate you sharing. So thank you.